Up next, we have the second paper in this session, and we're going to welcome Ms. Sharika Thompson and Tracy Maynard. Yes, Tracy. So Tracy is doing a presentation. We welcome Tracy as she shares with us a paper entitled Unravelling the Nexus between Environmental, Social, and Governance Factors and Foreign Direct Investment in Latin America and the Caribbean. All to you, Tracy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Maynard, and my presentation today will focus on unraveling the nexus between environmental, social, and governance factors and foreign direct investment in Latin America and the Caribbean. The paper is a joint effort between Ms. Thompson, Professor Moore, and myself. The presentation will take the following format. We'll look at the introduction, the motivation for the study, then we will proceed to the literature review, followed by the methodology, and finally the conclusions. What are the ESG factors? As we all know, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. ESG is concerned with socially responsible investing. It's about using sustainable practices. ESG forms the three pillars that evaluate the sustainability and ethical impact of investments in a country. The pillars are as follows. E, as I said, stands for environmental, and some of the factors considered in this pillar are climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, and another key area is renewable energy transition. The next pillar in the ESG is a social pillar. Some of the factors considered here are education access and quality, and access to basic services, and a number more are listed on the slides. Now, the last pillar, governance, takes into consideration aspects such as control of corruption, government effectiveness, and political stability and absence of violence. Furthermore, in the literature, according to Rishi 2021, investors now view ESG indicators not only as ethical imperatives, but also as proxies for long-term economic stability, institutional quality, and risk mitigation. Additionally, we've seen that Volz et al. 2022 noted that countries' efforts to align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and climate resilience initiatives have prompted countries to adopt greening initiatives, improve governance structures, and encourage corporate responsibility. More so, in the literature, it is noted that countries who implement the ESG criteria are in a much better position to attract FDI. However, these ESG initiatives translate into greater FDI inflows remains an open empirical question. According to the World Investment Report 2024, FDI flows to Latin America and the Caribbean declined 12% year on year, falling from around US 187 billion in 2023 to US 164 billion in 2024, despite renewed policy efforts to attract investments in emerging sectors. In the same period, however, we saw that Caribbean had an increase in inflows of around 21%. And this was mainly in the Dominican Republic. The study is motivated as follows. We wanted to know why does FDI and the LACs Do we adhere to environmental, social, and governance standards? And also the significance of ESG factors in attracting FDI to the LAC's regions remain underexplored. As I said earlier, Latin American and the Caribbean countries have started to focus on the E in ESG, and they have implemented a number of greening initiatives. Just to mention a few, in Barbados, there is a liberalization of the energy sector by enabling photovoltaic systems to feed electricity into the national grid. And then there is a government buildings retrofitting with energy efficient systems. And we also have tax incentives to encourage the purchase of electric vehicles. Then in Guyana, there's a low carbon development strategy. And here, Guyana receives payments to preserve its forest cover. The proceeds then go towards projects aligned with environmental sustainability. And the slide continues to show that there have been a number of greening initiatives employed throughout the Caribbean. We also did a survey of the literature to identify what are the basic drivers of FDI, as well as what aspects of the ESG drives FCI. I'll speak of two of these. We had a study by Sarah et al. 2022, and they look at the effects of institutional quality on FDI inflows. And they found that government effectiveness and political stability exhibit no significant impact on FDI in lower middle income countries. Then in 2015, there was a study by Fort Santos on FDI performance on Latin American countries. They noted that the key determinants of FDI were trade openness, quality of infrastructure, human capital, and institutional governance. The study employs a panel data approach. We're now on to our methodology. And this panel data approach investigates the determinants of FDI inflows across the LAC's economies, with particular emphasis on the ESG's performance. And we use the period 2000 to 2024. Two models were used in the analysis. There was a basic model where we look at the conventional determinants of FDI. And then the second model builds on the first model and included the ESG variables. In the baseline model, we examined the main macroeconomic factors influencing FDI in developing economies. And FDI, the dependent variable, was measured using net FDI inflows as a percentage of GDP. The independent variables used were GDP growth, representative of market potential. We used the real effective exchange rate, a measure of external competitiveness, gross capital formation, a measure of investment climate, the ratio of imports and exports to GDP to measure trade openness, and then inflation to measure the macroeconomic stability. Data was obtained from the Environmental, Social, and Governance and the World Development Indicators databases. And for the second model, the baseline model was then augmented with the ESG-related factors to determine their influence on FDI. And this was done using contemporaneous ESG variables and then the lag ESG variables. The ESG variables included in the model, as before I would have said what were the baseline variables. So the ESG model variables now would be the ones we use for environment, ENV, social, SOC, and GOV-Gov. And these indicators are based on their demonstrated empirical relevance in previous studies. The, the environmental variables we used in the paper were renewable energy consumption, carbon dioxide emissions per capita, while the social variables used were life expectancy at birth, literacy rate, and access to electricity. The governance variables used were control of corruption, government effectiveness, political stability, and absence of violence. The joint contribution of the ESG indicators to the baseline model was evaluated through the F-test. Fixed effects estimators was used, and all relevant diagnostic checks were done. Now we're on to the results and analysis. So having a look at our baseline model, here we have displayed the coefficients of the respective variables and their level of significance at the 1%, 5%, and 10% levels. The number in brackets is representative of the standard errors. The model shows that economic growth, trade openness, and the investment climate are positively associated with FDI inflows, and these are highlighted in red. GDP growth remains significant at the 5% level, indicating that higher market expansion attracts more investment. Again, trade openness and capital formation similarly exhibit positive and statistical significant effects, reaffirming that liberal trade regimes and robust domestic investment environments encourage foreign investors. Conversely, we saw that inflation showed a negative and significant relationship with FDI, where macroeconomic instability discourages long-term capital inflows. However, the real effective exchange rate is negatively signed, but statistically insignificant, implying that short-term exchange rate movements exert limited influence once other fundamentals are controlled for. Overall, these results confirm that macroeconomic stability and openness remain central to investment attractiveness across developing economies. In our ESG augmented model, where we now incorporate the different environmental variables, it shows that the government's indicators, those that are in gray, particularly control of corruption and government effectiveness, emerges as statistically significant determinants of FDI across most specifications. This finding supports the conclusion of Government 2002 and Dodd 2007, who argue that institutional quality enhances investor confidence and reduces transaction risk. In Latin America, the positive and significant effects of corruption, control, and government effectiveness align with the argument that transparent and efficient bureaucracies lower investment costs. Social indicators reveal nuance effects, those in blue. In Central America, life expectancy and illiteracy rates are both positive and significant, indicating that human capital quality is crucial for attracting FDI. Caribbean economies, however, exhibit strong positive effects for life expectancy and access to electricity, reinforcing the importance of basic infrastructure and social development in smaller island states. These results suggest that improvements in social and human capital dimensions not only contribute to national well-being, but enhances competitiveness. The environmental variables, however, showed mixed patterns. Those in green, renewable energy share exhibits a positive sign, but limited statistical significance, suggesting that the green transition may not yet be a dominant determinant of FDI in developing economies. Conversely, carbon intensity shows positive and significant coefficients in the Caribbean, implying that investment may still flow to more emission-intensive sectors, a finding consistent with the pollution haven hypothesis. Our final model, which then also lagged the environmental, social, and governance variables, we lagged the variables. And this would have helped us to address the issue of endogeneity in the paper. And we lagged the variables only by 1 year. And the rationale follows prior studies, which states that institutional reforms and social investment influence FDI with a bit of delay, as investors assess sustained improvements before committing to capital. This lag structure also mitigates simultaneous bias, where FDI flows could themselves enhance governance or social indicators. The lag ESG results largely mirror the contemporaneous estimates that we saw earlier, affirming the robustness of findings. The persistence of significance for governance indicators underscores that institutional quality exerts a lasting influence on investment attractiveness. In Latin America and Central America, control of corruption and political stability remains significant, with similar magnitudes consistent with long-run institutional credibility effects. Social indicators such as literacy and life expectancy, highlighted in the blue, retain positive signs but slightly reduced significance, suggesting that social progress influences FDI over a longer horizon but requires sustained policy continuity. In the Caribbean, the lag environmental variables retain significance in the green, particularly carbon intensity, indicating that past environmental performance continues to influence investment decisions. This persistence may reflect the path dependence of sectorial investment structures, as foreign investors in tourism and energy-intensive sectors respond to previous environmental policy regimes. The results therefore support a dynamic interpretation. ESG factors not only have immediate signaling effects, but also cumulative impacts over time. This temporal persistence aligns with the findings in the literature that states that ESG improvements gradually strengthens foreign investor confidence over time. In concluding, based on the result, it shows that GDP growth, trade openness, and capital formation all show positive and significant effects, confirming that expanding markets, open trade regimes, and strong domestic investment conditions do support higher FDI flows. Inflation is, however, negative and significant, aligning with prior studies that link macroeconomic instability to reduce FDI. The real effective interest rate was found to be negative. Its insignificance suggests that short-term currency movements matter less once broader fundamentals are considered. Additionally, positive coefficients for carbon intensity cautions that sustainability transitions in developing regions remain uneven. SDI-FDI nexus varies across regions over time, as the results show. In Latin America, governance reforms and macroeconomic fundamentals remain the primary levers for investment promotion. However, in Central America, the social indicators significantly influence FDI, underscoring the importance of human development policies as investment enablers. In the Caribbean, the environmental and social variables carry the greatest weight, reflecting the increasing alignment of FDI with sustainable development indicators in small developing states. Overall, the paper finds that LAC governments should engage in durable ESG progress to strengthen the region's investment climate and position the economies to attract sustainable long horizon capital inflows. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Just to not delay the process, I invite Ms. Candice Henriquez, Manager, Monetary Policy, Economics and Statistics at the Central Bank of Curaçao and St. Martin, to provide her insights on the paper.
Good morning. Thank you, Tracy. And I would like to commend you and your co-authors on a highly relevant and important study for the Caribbean region, where foreign direct investment is an important or a key source of external financing and an important driver of economic development. And as ESG performance, ESG considerations become increasingly central to global business decisions. Examining how these factors influence FDI is both timely and necessary. I thought also that the paper was very clearly written and very clearly and easy to read and understand. So I commend you on that. Basically, the paper investigates whether, through which channels, ESG performance affects FDI inflows, in particularly Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean over a period between 2000 and 2024. And you used a panel fixed effects methodology. You developed a baseline model that used the conventional indicators or the conventional determinants of FDI, and then you augmented it for ESG variables and also lagged ESG variables. When we look at Latin America, it's particularly macroeconomic stability and also the governance factors that play an important role, while in the case of Central America it's the social indicators, and in the Caribbean it is the social indicators and environmental considerations. In this regard, what was striking to me that you mentioned also is that higher carbon intensity seems to be associated with increased FDI in the Caribbean, which could imply also possible, let's say, pollution haven patterns in our region. Overall, when you include the ESG variables in your model, it improves the explanatory power of your models. As I mentioned before, a major strength of this research, I believe, it's the integrated approach, where you empirically link ESG dimensions to FDI inflow, an area that has received so far limited regional attention. I would like to offer some few recommendations that could help further strengthen the study. First, I think the section that you had in your paper on the targeted green initiatives is very informative and comprehensive, but I believe it is somewhat lengthy and falls slightly outside the main analytical scope. So I would streamline that a little bit and refocus on the 3 ESG pillars in the paper, which are the ones that you use also for the empirical results. I also believe that the paper would benefit from greater clarity, especially regarding the countries that you included. So when you use a panel, you could, for example, in the appendix mention which were the Latin America, Caribbean, and Central America country that you included. And also I would mention the data sources, because you use several data, which were the sources that you derived them from. That enhances the transparency, which is important for interpretation, comparability of your study. And finally, you make a distinction between Latin America, Central America, and Caribbean. I think that is very clear, but it seems like you treat each group as internally homogeneous, while there could be economic structure differences. If we look at the Caribbean, for example, we have tourism-dependent economies, but we have also, let's say, the commodity exporters. And it could be, and we have oil producers, it could be that they attract different types of FDI, and that could also have influence on your the dynamic or the relationship between the ESG factors and FDI. So a recommendation for further research is maybe to do also a classification based on economic structure and see whether the linkages that you saw in your models also apply when we differ between economic structure. But overall, congratulations on your paper, and I really enjoyed reading it.
Tracy, I think you have a lot to answer there. Then we will open the floor after for any comments or questions.
I would like to thank the reviewer for her comments. I do agree we can reduce the section where we have in the paper on the green initiatives throughout the Caribbean. I think what our focus was on, we were trying to show what the Caribbean countries have started to do in order to have more sustainable economies. So not only sustainable, but also in their efforts to try to encourage FDI, but definitely we could look at streamlining that a bit more. I take your point in terms of the countries we included in the study. As I said, we would have used the World Bank databases for most of our data. What we could probably also do is list the exact countries we use. I think we would have used the countries where we would have the majority of the data for, but we can definitely list those out in the paper. Thank you. Yes, and I also take your point in terms of disaggregating the countries in terms of service-based and goods-based countries. I think that is also a good analysis. Some of our colleagues, my colleagues would have also discussed that, but given the limited time to put the paper together, we didn't actually get to incorporate that in the study, but definitely going forward, we would include that. Thank you.
Now open up the floor. Is there anyone with any questions for Tracy? No, everybody ready to go for lunch? Just to thank you, Tracy, for sharing your thoughts and findings. I think this paper, it highlighted a global trend. Investors are really paying attention to the ESG factors, and I think your study showed that there's strong governance and social indicators like education and electricity access are clear magnets for FDI. And environmental factors are emerging, but we're seeing a mixed results, which suggests still that there's a transition towards that side of the environment. So, just a question to you, if I may ask. If given that you're looking at ESG, this is a new area of research for us here in the region, I think, with FDI. If you had to maybe formulate a policy in terms of to the government, which one would you go first for them to think that it would attract FDI? Governance, social development, or environmental?
As the study would have shown, it varies across the different countries in the LAC. But definitely for us, the small island economies, we would need to focus on the environmental aspect is still important for us, given that we are faced with the issues of climate change, which were mentioned today in several papers. So I think for FDI to come to our region, the investors have to be comfortable that we are putting policies in place to ensure the sustainability of their investment over time. And again, in the study, it shows that the social variables are also important for us because then it puts us more on a competitive level in terms of other countries, in terms of how educated our population are, and then also the basic access to services. So in terms of infrastructure, because if persons are going to invest in our countries, they're expecting to have good infrastructure that they could move
their products are whatever through efficiently without any bottlenecks and what's not. So in general, I do think that we need to still continue focusing on our renewable energy efforts. And again, in the paper, it did say that for governance indicators, that control of corruption is still essential, is one of the requirements in a Caribbean country. It was still significant, I think around at the 10% level. So yeah, I think, as I said finally in the paper, all aspects are still important for us to still continue to attract FDI. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So as we wrap up this session, I just want to say, it gave two complementary perspectives on the FDIs, right? The first showed that the structural dynamics, like tourism cycles, they still matter, they play an important role. And the second signal a shift towards, sustainability-driven investment strategies. I want to thank the presenters for, bringing those perspectives to the table, adding value to our session today. And I just want to join me in thanking them, our discussants, as well as you, the audience, for your time. And I think that we have Jordan. He was going to give us the announcements, but just join me in giving them a thank you. Yes? Thank you.